And that the exclusionary clauses that he mentioned, the 5 fingers, think about how many kids in El Paso who might be receiving special ed services, we have not asked the question of educational opportunity. Okay, so we are very quick to overlook that, yet it should be one of the foundations of saying, well, if a child hasn't had an opportunity to learn or has been in continuous school, you know, whether it's in Mexico or here, we need to very cautiously think of that child as having a disability, especially a learning disability, okay? Because if we use appropriate instruction, that child would probably learn, okay? I really wanted you all to hear the thing about the distractibility issue, because there is that misconception that we say, oh, students who have attention deficit disorder, you know, don't pay attention. And that is one of the reasons why sometimes the teacher might have a hard time with that particular child because they're, you know, like all over the place. But when we sit down and you actually go through the evaluation process, academically, they are picking up on the information they need. Now, you also have the case of the child who is not paying attention to everything that's happening around them, in the sense of they're not picking up the everyday information that comes in, you know, that most kids learn in schools. And some of the tests that are administered to kids and the cognitive testing precisely looks at what is it that they're picking up around. Are they picking up the knowledge that most kids pick up on? And some kids don't. So there's, for many learning disabled kids, there's many learning disabled kids that have very similar characteristics also to a student who's attention deficit disorder. Okay, so there's that combination. And then he also talks about the language processing part of it, which brings it into hand. So now you've got the attention and the processing. Now think about this and the similarities that it might have with a second language learner or an English language learner. Are there some type of overlaps there? Especially if you're not making those connections. You know, if you're not helping the student make the connections with what they know in their own language to be able to process the information in English also. I use this example sometimes also. If I myself had to sit in a graduate level chemistry class, I'd probably get really fidgety and lose attention after 5 or 10 minutes of being there because I would have no idea of where they're coming from, right? So think about that when you're working with your kids. Don't assume that they know what you're talking about. Just with what we've seen so far and using the concept of universal design, thinking that these might be some of the kids, you've already used some examples. Are there any other examples that you can think of that you could start implementing that will be helping your students with disabilities, but would probably also help other students in the classroom as well? Think about that child who's not labeled yet. One of the things that he presented, Richard Lavoie presented here, is like when he used that strategy with the student, he says, what's important is to be consistent and do it over and over again. For some kids it might take 10 times, for some kids it might take 2 times. But what he says is that after a while, before you know it, they'll know what to do. And as simple as a task may seem, don't assume that she might be so overwhelmed. I mean, and from what you picture, I mean, this child probably needs a lot of structure. So maybe just sit down with her and say, okay, look, these are the 3 things you need to do to be able to get this part. You need to get a magazine, we need scissors, and we need glue, and your journal, whatever. And okay, and then when you have all of this together, then we'll talk about how you're going to put it together. Because she might, I mean, for some kids it's so overwhelming to think of what the final product has to be that they don't even know how to get to there.
Can't get started.
I mean, how many of you have felt that way with projects in your classes? The first time you read them, you're like, what? What are they thinking? This teacher is crazy. You know, they don't understand us. We have so much. And then you start breaking it down. And once you start feeling like you have some control over it, then you can take the next step. And by the time you get to the end of it, like passing your certification exams, you've done it, you've over it. But you can't do it all. You can't bite it all off at one time, right? And for some kids, many of our kids have those internal structures so that they can do it themselves. Others don't. And that's what a learning disabled child really is a child that doesn't have those structures. They haven't picked it up normally as most kids pick them up, okay? The ability to focus and study, to be able to tune out the outside noises, to be able to sit down and get their homework and be prepared. Some kids are intuitively have that, and others, no matter what you do, aren't going to get it. Children that have these characteristics, as they grow up, oftentimes find jobs that are very structured in nature. Military, for example. I mean, just, we have a lot of kids, because the military is so structured. They know they have to get up at 7 and they have to have their shoes shut. They don't have to worry about somebody telling them what to do because they know what it's like. And they seek people like that. So a structured teacher, like the teacher that, you know, they said, oh, but you're so good with the kids, because maybe you are naturally organized that way. I am not. and that's where getting to know ourselves is very important, because I myself am not that type of a structured person. So when I was a teacher, I had to be really careful. And I mean, I had students with special needs, and I had kids that if we didn't follow the structure would fall apart. If we had a fire drill in the middle of the day that was not, I mean, it was a disaster, you know. That was the end of our day with that particular kid. And I had to, I still struggle with that. So you see, that's why my workshop has been all over the place today. But that's just the type of learner I am. And some kids just really require that. So maybe in volleyball you can say, okay, listen, in this particular position, I want you, you know, break it down. It's what we call task analysis. You go backwards. In some classrooms, you might have even done the peanut butter and jelly sandwich. It's like, teach us how to do a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. But you have to break it down to every minute skill. If you think about like tying your shoelaces, buttoning, some things have to be broken down to that level. So don't assume that your kids have these skills, because for many of them, they might benefit from this, okay? Okay, let's go on to think about how many, once he said it was a cow. Okay, all right, and there's our teacher. And the rest of us who, and I've seen this I don't know how many times, I mean, I knew what I was seeing, but I had to like focus to see it, you know. It didn't come automatically. So, but this is a very good example. You've heard two things now. One is the auditory perception, how we process the language or what we're hearing, and the other thing is visual perception. Our eyes are fine, our hearing is fine, but it's how the brain processes the information, okay? And so and he goes into the reversals of the letters as well, but for some kids, this is just a constant, everyday type of activity. So, I mean, they have to live this way all the time. So, if you're thinking universally, and you're thinking you might have some kids that have some visual perception or auditory perceptual type of deficits, whether they're labeled or not, what are some things you can do in your classroom that would help you know, accommodate for students with these type of learning needs? Slow down. I think if we tape ourselves, I know I get going very fast, blah, 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 you know, but I think if you just digitally record yourself, put your phone on, you know, most of our phones will record now, and just listen to the speed of of how you're presenting information. The gift of time is really important. And the 4-second wait for that 4 times 1, whatever, it might not have been as bad, you know, but we want kids to have it automatic at 1 second. But time and repetition would probably make a huge difference. So And then again, think about our English language learners on top of that. So even without having the processing deficits, they're still dealing with the language and having to translate and put the meaning in. And I know many of you here are English language learners yourselves and have, had to struggle with that in, coming to UTEP and going through courses that maybe are not your content courses. You have to really focus and have a deep understanding of the language that's being used in that particular classroom. And most of you have taken a reading course, or you've taken your RED courses, and you'll have to tell me what's you're exposed to there, but there's a big push in literacy development, especially, is that we have to teach things kind of in a holistic way, right? And that we bring the content in, and learn, and kids learn vocabulary better when it's in a meaningful context and so on. But what he's saying here with direct instruction is that some kids need instruction in sight words, they need letter sound associations, math, they need to know they need to have kind of like know the formulas to be able to understand the concept behind it. So some kids learn things globally and then they can take things apart, and other kids need the steps to get to the global. So we have two different types of learners. And direct instruction is really about sitting with a child and not assuming that they know all of this background information and they can actually sit down, or you sit down with them and you explain things to them. You might have explained it once before, you might have explained it 2 times before, but it's very important to sit down with that particular kid that's having difficulties and explain it to them again and show them different ways of doing it. So don't assume that just because you've already taught it once, everybody's going to pick it up. Okay? And so again, this is going back to that universal design piece, is that if you find kids that are questioning or they have a puzzled look and you've gone through something already, you go back and you do it again. Okay? Before you blame them, and like you said, okay, you messed up once, leave my classroom, I can't deal with you anymore, right?